All right, user error.
Now, depending on how good the class is, we may not want to hear you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you may be asking me to turn it off in a minute. So this morning, we're continuing our study of the fruit of the Spirit, and we've made it halfway through the list. Kindness. So I'll confess, when I looked and saw that this was the topic that had wound up in my queue, I thought, oh, that'll be a breeze. Kindness. How can you go wrong with kindness? Everybody knows what kindness is. It should be something that everybody learned in kindergarten, and how hard can this be? I'll confess it's pretty convicting whenever you start really deeply looking at what kindness is, what it means from a Christian perspective, what it means from a godly perspective. And, there's some stuff that really hit home with me when I started this study. And so I'm hoping this morning, as we engage in this, that, we can make it past that facade of what we think about kindness just from a very superficial standpoint, and really look at it and give it the attention and the real focus that I hope that you'll see it needs as we get at that. So, one of the fruit of the Spirit, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. In the King James, kindness is actually reflected here as gentleness, and then gentleness later in the list is meekness. But I think the NIV, when I really looked at what the meaning in the context of the way we speak today, gentleness doesn't really capture it. It really is something different. So I like the NIV term of kindness, but what do you think of when you hear that term, kindness? What comes to mind?
Nice.
Nice. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Caring. Thoughtful. Yep. So what kind of acts do you think of when you think of kindness? I'm sorry? Understanding. Helpfulness. Yeah. What kind of people? What do people do that you look at and go, man, that's reflection of kindness?
They go out their way.
They go out of their way. I mean, one of the things, I have a friend who doesn't work, he actually volunteers, which what makes it really an act of kindness, with the Lifeline Chaplaincy group. And so he goes down twice a week out of his own time and ministers to people he doesn't even know at the hospital, visiting them, praying with them, just letting them talk, holding their hands. To me, that is an example of pure kindness. Any others?
Yeah. To the recipient, it always seems unexpected.
Okay. So something they don't think that they deserve.
Yeah,
or
we might plan to be kind and do something for someone, but for them,
Yeah.
Seems to be a surprise.
Okay. I think there's some element of that that we'll talk about in terms of entitlement a little bit later. So, good. All right. So all these fruits, though, they're interconnected, right? I mean, last week Bob talked about forbearance, and next week we're going to talk about goodness and gentleness. All of these things are interrelated, right? You can't. It's really hard to tease them apart, but kindness kind of sits in the middle of all of this stuff, and let's just talk a little bit more. So we'll do our obligatory word. Maybe we will. Did I do it again, Bob? No lights. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the Greek word here is Christotes, and it's used several times in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, of course, in Hebrew, it's related to a term that's used reflecting God's loving kindness. And so it really means in the Greek tender concern, goodness in righteous action. So having that actual active essence to it, philanthropy, sweetness. And then the one ways that the Greeks used it was they're talking about wine. Wine being mellow. That's the same word. So it reflects that lack of harshness. And like I said, in the Old Testament, whenever you see God reflected and talked about in kindness, it's always in a way that's talking about His tender mercies, His loving kindness. And so I thought we'd start in the Old Testament with what I consider a great example of kindness, and teases out several versions. So 2 Samuel 9. Does anybody remember a character named Mephibosheth? Mephibosheth. Okay, so I'll remind you. Mephibosheth was Ishbosheth's son, who was the grandson of Jonathan and Saul. So when the final straw fell for Saul and Jonathan, Mephibosheth was under the care of a nanny, and they're fleeing the house because they're afraid of what's going to happen as part of this transition of power. And the nanny fell, and Mephibosheth was injured in a chronic way and was disabled from that point forward. So he couldn't work, couldn't do anything. Well, so years go by. David's on the throne, and one day David basically says, "Hey, is there anybody left out of Saul's household that I can be kind to?" And so he asked around, found one of the old servants of Saul, and he said, "Yeah, Mephibosheth is still around." And so David says, "Go find him." And he brings him in, and he restores his lands in his farm, and he basically tells the servant that worked for Saul, "Hey, you're going to go and you're going to operate his estate for him. Give him all of the rewards that come out of that. And in addition to that, Mephibosheth, who is the son of my previous rival, or is it the lineage of my previous rival, and if you remember, in the way that the world would look at kings in the past, that line of descendancy often was used to reassert authority in a kingdom. And so there was always a chance that somebody from Saul's line could have stood up and said, "Listen, I'm the real king," and through another coup. And so this guy is, even though he's disabled, he's still a threat to David. But David says, "No, he's going to sit at my table, and he's going to eat with me, and he's going to enjoy the rewards of me caring for him." To me, that is an example of true godly kindness. Thoughts? So what were some of the things out of that? So one thing is, it was intentional, right? David didn't just say, it just wasn't a spur of the moment thing. I mean, he had to actually have somebody go and do some research and find these people and help and find Mephibosheth, and he had to intentionally act out this. It was long-term. It wasn't a hit and miss. It wasn't, hey, go give the guy a bag of gold and I'm done. Nope, he committed to a relationship with this person. So all of these things that intertwine here, including the mellowness that David acted as an authority of the king of Israel, he still acted with kindness toward what could have been considered a rival to him. So Mary said a minute ago, nice. So kindness. Now, isn't that nice? What do you think? What do you think of nice and kindness? How are they related? All right, so nice is really something we do to fit into a societal construct, right? It's being polite. It's not being offensive to others. It's basically, at its root, I won't say selfish, but there is self-interest involved. You can be nice but you can do it at a very superficial level, Smiling and greeting somebody, that's nice, right? But you're doing that because you don't want to be considered in a bad light, right? You're doing it almost for your own benefit. Kindness is really something, though, that is sacrificial. It's something that's not necessarily benefiting you. Now, kindness will often benefit you, but that's not really the core motivation or the real intent behind it. It can be hard, right? Can you think of times where being kind to somebody is just downright hard? Yeah, I know there's times in my life when I've encountered situations where I just did not want to be kind, and sometimes I failed, I'll have a string of confessions this morning because, like I did say, this convicted me in several ways as I was studying this. But there are times I've failed to be kind, and because it did require something that was going to take away from me in some way. Thoughts on that? Nice versus kind?
So would be kind of going with the nice thing.
Mm-hmm.
And from the perspective of you can be nice, not really. Or the situation may require you to be nice, but you don't be.
Yeah.
That could also apply to kind.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a kind thing, maybe not because it's a desire to do the right thing or to do a good thing. Maybe if you feel like you're pressured into being kind. Or you may be kind to someone because in the back of your mind you're trying to get something else for yourself or make a situation better for yourself. So in light of the descriptions provided, you consider that form of kindness a true kindness.
Yeah, one of the things that I really focused on and tried to tease out in studying this was that aspect of kindness really is an active thing. It's not an emotional thing. It really is relying on doing, being. It's becomes part of your character, not something that you put a facade on to act out or don't put, or if you, sometimes being kind, because it is sacrificial, it's going to be painful, and you may not feel the high of it immediately. But, I mean, I can think of times in my life where at the moment, the act, you didn't really feel like doing it, but you did it anyway. But then later you were like, I'm glad I did that. It really benefited me. So I think, I'm not sure I answered your question, but is that kind of where you were going?
Yeah, that, and just from the perspective of would it be the true kindness if it's done for the wrong motivation?
Ooh. I don't know.
I'm asking the question. Being kind, no, but I just wonder. And it's a question that can be plugged out.
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to punt that question, but that's something that would apply to all the fruits of the spirits, right? Can you be gentle without feeling it? I think in a minute, though, so let me backtrack on that, because I think in a minute we're going to talk some about that, so hold that thought, because I think we may answer some of that.
I was going to say, this passage out of Galatians is talking about the fruit of the Spirit,
Yeah.
not the fruit of the people in
Right.
whom the Spirit dwells.
Yeah.
So this is something that comes essentially from the influence of the Holy Spirit on our lives. We can grieve Him by choosing to do it for other motives.
Right. No, that's a perfect point, Jack, and I think it's a great lead-in. I wanted to, one quote, though, in terms of things. So Abigail Van Buren said, "The best index to a person's character is how he treats people who can't do him any good, and how he treats people who can't fight back." I thought, hey, that's a pretty good description of kindness in its core, as above being nice, which, may or may not reflect that same type of character. But to follow on Jack's saying, so here's a definition I found that from Stephen Whitmer when I was doing my study. He says, a supernaturally generous orientation of our hearts toward other people. So what I wanted to focus on there was that thought of the supernatural. So in the context of Galatians, kindness really is one of the fruit. It's one of the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. And so that indwelling of the Holy Spirit is helping us, or is providing the character of kindness. Agree? Disagree? So I think one of the things, though, teasing out that a little bit more is, so what does that mean in terms of the reflection of God and His Holy Spirit through us in those fruits? Excuse me. So God's kindness is something that is talked about all throughout the text that we have, Old Testament and New Testament, right? God is reflected as kind to us. It's everywhere, and I think the one of the ways that it comes to us specifically is manifested in us in His grace to us, right? And so, Bob talked about grace a couple of weeks ago. So Romans says that in the past He let all nations go their own way. Yet He was not Himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your heart with joy. So God's manifested everything with His kindness. You agree with that? All right, so let's dig a little deeper on that one then. I tell you what, Bob, I'm not sure if I'm keep having to turn it on and off. Bob, I'm not sure I've got it. All right. So this is another definition. So you're getting a whole bunch of definitions this morning, right? Grace which pervades the whole nature, and then I added of someone because I think nature, sometimes people read that and they jump. Mellowing all which would be harsh and austere. You know, we live in a fallen world. I mean, ever since man was kicked out of Eden, the world itself is harsh. It is not paradise. It is, at its core, a difficult place. But God's creation itself reflects His kindness, even over our fallen world. And so, go with me here. How would it look like without His kindness? So one of the things that I think about here is just the world itself without beauty. I mean, so you've got minerals and stone, but those get manifested to us as majestic mountains, right? We've got water, which at its core is very destructive, but it's also necessary for our life, and it comes down as rain and creates beautiful waves and rainbows in the sky. You've got solar radiation. Boy, you don't want to mess with solar radiation, but it reflects to us as beautiful sunsets and, the warm sensation on our skin on a cold day. The physical beauty of life itself, of flowers, and the reproductive cycle of vegetation that generates so many kind things for us, food for our tables. And so these, to me, when I think about it and when I sit down and really just contemplate this stuff, those type of kindnesses are incredible. Can you imagine what it would look like without that? Psalms, hope this is working. Yeah, Psalm says, David wrote, "The Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger and great in mercy. The Lord is good to all, and His tender mercies are all over His works." Well, that term tender mercies is another way of defining kindness. And I love that. I love that, tender mercies. That's just such a powerful phrase to me. So what do you think about that? Do you think God's kindness comes across as things of beauty to us, as things of comfort to us, as things of providing for us? Or do you think it's just the way it is? I don't know if God made us to appreciate these things or He made these things so they would be appreciated by us. But either way, I think it's a reflection of His kindness.
Well, it's a constantly present testimony.
Uh-huh. Yep. Did you guys ever hear Jack? He said it's a constantly present testimony. Yep. So let's continue on with that thought, though. We are also ourselves, we are fallen, right? None of us could live in the presence of God unprotected by the blood of Jesus Christ. Correct? We're all fallen. We're all sinners. We all fall so far short of the standard that God, He Himself exists at, that we can't even fathom that. But, one of the other attributes of God, we talked about the attributes of God last year in some of the classes, and one of them was justice, right? So God, one of the attributes of God is his harsh justice. I mean, it's black and white with him, right? Sin cannot have any presence with God. And he can't allow that, which is why he sent Jesus as a way of bridging that grasp. And we won't talk about propitiation. There's another big word this morning. But the point is that we are so far from God that if we were to, our sin and our fallenness meeting him would be the most harsh reaction that you can imagine. And I don't, so one of the things that occurred, I was watching a movie and there, it was a silly sci-fi type thing, but matter and antimatter, right? So one of the key things about the theories involving antimatter are if these things touch, they annihilate each other in a very energistic way, but it's total annihilation. These things cease to exist. And I think about that, that if we were to come into God's presence, what a total annihilation it would be of us if we weren't there with his Son standing in the way of that reaction. And to me, that is tempering the harshness of that justice through God's kindness. Does that make sense? Am I off in the weeds? Can I get a nod? Makes sense. Okay. All right, what's another way that that the nature of kindness helps temper or mellow out something? Anybody else think of something? What about truth in relationships? You think kindness helps there? Yeah. Can you imagine getting along with anybody if everything was just black and white with no kindness laid in on top of it? Now, does that mean it's not that we're not to be truthful? No. But there's ways of delivering truth that are kind and ways of delivering truth that are unkind. I think we could all think of doing that. And one example I ran across was back when letter writing was a thing and back when editorials were actually submitted into a paper and written, what would turned out to be a formerly practicing lesbian had written a big defense of her lifestyle and the reasons that she thought that the world at the time, was discriminating against her and all the reasons that were defending her lifestyle choices. And she said she expected a lot of reaction, and she got it. So her mailbox started filling up with letters of people, and and she would take those letters and she would open them and she'd read them. She had two piles, one that were the supporting her position pile and the one that were, basically condemning her. She said she got a particular letter from one of the local preachers, and she started reading it. And she reread it again. And she reread it again, and she said, I looked at my two piles and realized I didn't know what to do with this thing, because it was filled with so much kindness that it made her stop and think, is there a way that I could be wrong here? But it wasn't done in a harsh way. So it really opened her up to a message because it was so kind. That was the key attribute. And so she later studied and became a Christian. And so to me, that's a perfect example of delivering truth in a way that will actually make an impact. Anybody think of any other examples?
I think a soft, a gentle
Mm-hmm.
keeping the peace, bringing their mood down, back on, even killed.
Yeah. So what's the cruelest, most harshest place on this planet right now, today? The internet. That is exactly right. I mean, there is no place that you could go that would be any more cruel, any more harsh, any more reflective of of man's anger toward one another than the internet. Absolute disaster out there. Social media, I don't understand why people give it any credence at all or any thought. But if you are on social media, who do you tend to gravitate toward in terms of really engaging with? Is it those people that are slamming each other, that are just name calling, that are making up names against each other, or is it the people that are actually taking the time to kindly respond in ways that make you think this person really cares? I think the
I
answer is
gravitate toward people like you.
like me? Oh, Jim, I don't know.
No, I mean, if you're a harsh person, you may enjoy that. If you're a kind person, you'll enjoy that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I don't mean you personally.
Right. Yeah. So we gravitate to people who speak our language, basically, or share our same value system and stuff. Birds of a feather flock together. Yeah, that's good. So my whole point there is, though, there's a lot of harshness in the world and a lot of different things in our relationships, and kindness really is what gives us the ability to make those constructive and to enjoy the fruits of our labor and to enjoy God's creation. So we need to move along because I'm never going to get finished here. I don't know, Bob. There we go. Killing them with kindness. So one thing that, as I was studying this, you think of kindness, and I think of the kindly lady baking the apple pie and putting it on the windowsill to cool, and the young boys in the neighborhood, eyeing it from the lawn. Boy, I'm showing my age, aren't I? Here, that's people don't probably respond to those type of analogies anymore. But and she sees and notices them and slices them, a piece of it off and hands it out the window to them. And I think of that, in a very touchy-feely, emotional way. But kindness has power. Kindness is not really meant to reflect weakness. It's really strength of character. I mean, to be kind, you have to be strong. I mean, kindness is not willy-nilly. And in fact, there's a lot of times where kindness, really it requires, rebuke. David talks about, let a righteous man strike me. That is a kindness. Let him rebuke me. That is oil in my head. My head will not refuse it, for my prayer will still be against the evildoers. So David says, hey, rebuke me. Give me instruction. That's really a kindness. Now, we just talked about how that might be delivered. Could be done in an unkind way. But we can't look at kindness as something that isn't sometimes not nice, right? In the terms of politeness or in the terms of trying to just get along. So Romans talks about the power of kindness to deal with our enemies. So I think everybody's, this is something that comes up a lot. Don't overcome evil, but overcome evil with good. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome evil by evil, but overcome evil with good. So the notion here is tough, right? I mean, it took me a while to parse through that, right? How kindness heaping burning coals on your enemies. Can you think of an example?
Is that called passive aggressive?
Well, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I'm not going to answer that question. I'm sure it's not, but I'm thinking passive aggressiveness has to do with the end goal, and in this case, the end goal is really allowing God to administer the wrath, not us. Does that make sense?
Yes, but that may be your intent.
It may be your intent. Yeah. Yeah. Jack, you said.
Yeah, if our speech is supposed to be seasoned with salt, and we're the salt of the earth, but we lose our saltiness, then our speech isn't seasoned anymore. And unfortunately, instead of being a light on a hill, we're a foghorn. And that doesn't do anybody any good.
I like that.
Don't listen to it.
I like that. Yeah, I was thinking of, an example of this. So a neighborhood dog, gets walked every morning and decides its favorite place to defecate is right in the middle of your front yard, right? And every time you mow the lawn, you're reminded of this. So I don't necessarily have any ill feelings towards these people, but in essence, they're enemies, right? They're people who are not acting toward me in a way that I want them to act toward me, right? By allowing their dog to do this. Well, I could take several actions here, right? I could get on the neighborhood social media site and really blast this person. I could get a camera out and take a picture of them and shame them. I could stand out there and confront them. I'm sorry? Yeah, I could build. Well, I can't. My HOA won't allow that, but yeah, that could be an answer. Yeah. But when I think about this verse, what should be my action? What occurred to me is maybe I should stand out there with treats for the dog and greet them and feed and play with the dog. And what would that do to the owner? How would they feel? I'm sorry?
Give the owners credit to clean up after them.
Yeah, I could hand them the bag, but I mean, if I was the owner of that dog, and suddenly this neighbor started treating me and my dog with this kindness, wouldn't that be heaping burning coals on my head? Wouldn't I feel terrible that I'd been allowing that to happen? And so, kind of a silly example, but it's kind of demonstrates the power of kindness as opposed to confrontation, or kindness as opposed to the harsh reality of engagement, So anyway.
If you will be feeding the dog food, you will run away from the owner.
That's true. Okay. You can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. True? I've never tried it. Is it true? I guess it's true. And we're running out of time, so I'm not going to have time to really go into this too deeply. But in Romans, it talks about God's kindness is what intended you to lead to repentance. So basically, when you dig deep into this, it's basically saying the presence of wrath is always there. It always has been and always will. We are under the same conditions to accept God's wrath as anybody else on this planet, except for the fact that God's Son is covering for us. But in Romans, Paul's basically saying, but yeah, all of that's true, but it's really God's kindness that is intended to lead you to salvation. And to me, that's just a perfect example of that term. It's God. We've always known the nature of God. Romans clearly plays that out. We know that we're sinners. We know that we fall short. But God's kindness is really what's allowing us the time to come to the conclusion that we need His Son. And so, any more thoughts on that one? I'm going to have to speed along because we don't have much time left. Okay, so why don't we? If kindness is so important, if it's such a reflection of God, if it's so admirable in others, it's such a way to bring others to God through kindness, and He commanded us to do it. What's holding us back? What are some of the things that get in the way here? So here's confession time again. I fall back often on the lukewarm Christian's favorite tool, rationalization. I can rationalize just about anything. And there are times when, you see somebody that needs help. You see people on the corner that need something. You see the homeless that you pass on the streets, and we don't see a lot of homeless in our neighborhoods, but we see them. They're out there. You look for them. And I rationalize my way out of helping, of doing that kindness to these people. What are some of the excuses we use? Surely I'm not the only one. I hope I'm the only one, but surely I'm not the only one. Give a man a fish, and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he'll eat for a lifetime. Great little proverb. Makes a great bumper sticker, right? How many times does that go through our head when we see these people? Well, I can give them a meal, but they're just going to be out here again tomorrow. What does that say about us in our kindness?
It has other side too. If those people want help, they will find you. There's always stations, and if they don't want to, you can't do anything with them. They will eat, they will run away. You will find them nothing.
Yeah.
They find a transport where they can sleep. They need to do it on their own. You can do as much as you can, but if they won't do it, you can force them. You can make them.
All true. My point is, from my perspective, which is what I need to be worrying about. I don't need to worry about their motivations, right? We've got other texts that talk about that. This is on me. Me doing kindness does not depend on them. It shouldn't.
Jesus said to the 5,000, you're only coming for the food.
Mm-hmm.
But He still gave the food.
Yeah. And so my point is, that thing goes through my head. Give a man a fish, but teach it to fish. But do I sit and do I then try to help teach him to fish? No, we forget the whole last part of that and use that as our excuse for not doing anything. And I say us. I'm talking me, right? I told Jeanette when I was going through this study, I'm like, this is really burning me. Thinking about some of these things and thinking about the acts of kindness that I'm leaving completely undone. And the reasons are what hurts the most, right? is whenever you're really caught in that act of rationalization, when you're really caught in that line of traffic in your head that allows you out of these situations and still let you feel good about going on with the rest of your day. I don't want that. I mean, well, I do from a comfort standpoint, I want that, but I think from a challenge to me as a Christian aspect, I don't want that. I don't want that to be the reason I'm not doing stuff. So there's my confession. We're out of time. The rest was talking about, acts of kindness and practices, being compassionate and kind to one another, forgiving. Then there's the aspects of basically instructing and helping. Those are all acts of kindness. Then you get to the more physical things, providing food, water, helping those that truly are in need. But I think at the end, it comes down to this. In everything you do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. So if you're ever in doubt what's kind, what would you like if you were in the other situation, if you were flipped with them? All right. Thank you for your attention this morning. Thanks for your engagement. Next week, I think Bryant's going to talk about goodness.
You're a good teacher. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.